We're going to call our Planning Commission meeting to order. This is the Provo City Planning Commission meeting on the 27th of March, and it is 6 p.m. We're going to begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, and Commissioner Knudsen is going to lead us in that. Thank you. Although this is a public hearing, first we need to do a roll call. So we'll start over here, please.
Jonathan Hill, no conflicts.
Lisa Jensen, no conflicts.
Robert Knudsen, no conflicts.
Barbie DeSoto, no conflicts.
And Jeff Whitlock, no conflicts. Although this is a public hearing, only the presenters and those invited by the commission may speak or ask questions unless otherwise invited by the chair. Please wait to speak until called on. When speaking, be sure to speak into the microphone so that the record is clear. Please state your name and city of residence for the record. Please limit side conversations as they interfere with the audio recording. If you need to have a side conversation, you may step out of the chambers. Please do not attempt to interrupt or speak over others. Intimidating or threatening speech or behavior of any kind will not be tolerated. Please refrain from clapping, cheering, booing, or otherwise being disruptive during the hearing. And with that read, we will get right into our agenda. So for item 1, the Provo City Council proposes ordinance text amendments to section 14.30.020, permitted use of accessory dwelling units to remove specific zones from ADU allowance. Mr. Ardmore will come up and present this item.
Thank you. All right, so I've got one slide on this, so not too exciting. But this is coming from the City Council office. We do have representatives of that office here as the applicant to take up the applicant time. Malia will come up after me. So just real briefly, this has been a discussion point of the council to remove the Broadview Shores development, that SDP 5 zone, from the ADU allowance, because currently everything west of 515 allows for it. And within their zone code themselves, they wrote that ADUs weren't permitted. So this is just to provide consistency with that. And the other one is with the R2 PD zones. I identified all the R2 PDs in the city in your packet. The majority of them are townhomes and condos where ADUs just aren't realistically able to be there. So we're removing those as well. And nothing else is changing with the ADU through this amendment. Staff is recommending approval, and I will. Oh wait, I do need to bring up something. I'm sorry. You'll notice that the language is a little bit different from your packets to what's on the screen. So the council office moved the ordinance around a little bit. So you see the SDP 5 zone is now in subsection 3, where before it was combined in 2B with the R2 PD. That was made because that map is identifying in number 3, everything west of I-15. That seemed like the more appropriate section to put that exception there. No substantial change. The end result is the same. It's just the wording was moved around for you from your staff reports. That is all I have.
Does anyone have questions?
Okay. Just on that language there in section 2 and 3, it feels like it's backwards. Can you give me an understanding of why it's written to be exclusive instead of inclusive? Like, why can't they just say these are the areas that allow it instead of all areas except for these?
Right.
Because it's not really very many areas.
From what I understand is it's similar to how the state wrote their ADU ordinance, where it's written almost negatively rather than
right.
The way that would.
Because this is very confusing. I was like, if I didn't know what you were getting at because of the staff report, I would have no idea what this was saying.
Yeah, that has come up, but my understanding is because it's kind of
Okay.
following the form of the state.
My other questions are just in regards to, are the ADUs currently allowed outright in these R2 areas or only with neighbor approval right now? The ones on the east side?
On the east side, it would be typically with the neighborhood approval with the 2/3, the 040 section allowance.
Because I was just concerned that since it's such a huge swath, is it possible that some of these properties have already got it in their mind that they can have an ADU and now without any public noticing as like individual property public noticing? Because it's such a huge one, I can't imagine that a mailing went out. So how do we worry about any backlash from there?
I'd honestly be surprised because, like I said, a lot of these are older townhomes and condos where you just the thought of ADU was just never imagined, right? Because you can't park it, you can't. Yeah.
Okay, because there's a section in the list of properties, number 9. It says Sunridge Hills, and some of those are twin homes and single family homes.
Right.
So I know that some of them, for example, think that they can have an ADU. I don't know that it's been applied for and done legally, but like, what's the repercussion of that? Do we need to worry about?
No.
Oh, we thought we could do this and now we can't.
You know, if they did it legally, this would make it non-conforming.
Okay.
If they didn't do it legally, then
Okay.
we're not too worried about it.
Okay. Is it possible just to peek at the permits and see if any of them fall in that?
Yes.
I'm just curious to see if anyone even thought it was a good idea ever in any of these 9.
I'd be happy to do
R2s.
that between now and the council hearing for sure.
Okay. Just to see if somebody thought it was realistic or if there maybe will be a kerfuffle because the permission was taken away and somebody bought a property with the expectation that they could.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good insight. I'll look into that.
Okay, that's all.
Great questions, Commissioner Jensen. Thank you. Any other questions?
I have questions. So just so I understand the map right now, are these all the ADUs allowed? Or these are just the ones you're talking about that are in the gray on this map?
I'm sorry.
Are these all the ADUs in Provo? Like, or is this just part of one? Because I'm not as familiar with you as you.
The existing map in
Yes.
020?
Yes.
No, that's not all the areas.
This is
that
the
have
area you're
ADUs.
talking about. Okay.
Yeah, so those are all the by right east of I-15. They can do it by right.
Okay.
Outside of that, they have to get the 2/3 neighbors signature.
Okay. And then it says all areas west of Interstate 15
Are permitted by right.
permitted by right. Okay.
I have a question for you. Just taking a step back, I'm curious. I read the kind of each individual answers where it kind of says what is the public purpose of this? It says reasonable expectations and providing clarity. But what I'm curious about is like, what was the impetus for this?
The council.
The city council.
The city council
is-
directed staff to go this way. Their staff.
Was there rationale provided when they provide that direction?
I'd defer to Melia to give you some background on
Okay,
that.
awesome. Should we invite her up?
Yeah, if you have no more questions for me.
Any other questions for Mr. Ardmore? Okay,
Okay, thanks.
thank you.
Okay, I don't have anything specifically prepared, but I'll kind of touch on some things you brought up here, and then if you have more questions, I will be happy to answer those. As far as the way it's written, we agree it's kind of written confusing and hard to understand, but it does reflect the way that it's written in state code. State code's also written this kind of backwards way, so we just copied it. And so we can change it, but that would require just rewriting the whole chapter. We just haven't done that yet. Trying to think. Oh, impetus for this change. So if you remember at the end of last year, we were here just doing a code cleanup to this ordinance. And in that discussion, while we were having that discussion at the council, there was some confusion about the previous year's amendments to this chapter. And they thought the R2 PD and the SDP 5 zone were excluded from ADU allowance, and they in fact weren't. And so there was confusion there, and so the council just decided to go ahead and make that clear. And so whether that was an admittance on staff's part or just something that got lost in all the amendments we were making in 2022, I'm not quite sure, but now we're just going back and doing that. So it was just a council decision to add these zones.
I have another question. I don't know who can answer it, but how does this compare to what ADUs are available in the rest of these areas?
These areas mean the rest of the
Like
city?
near
or-
it, neighboring neighborhoods and
The
zones.
majority of the city in residential zones, you can't have ADUs. I think we're sitting at about like 49% of residential zones in the city allow ADUs now with these changes. And so as far as zones touching these, I'm not quite sure. On the west side, everything is except for the SDP 5, which is just the Broadview Shores development. And then east of I-15 in the R1 zones, which is this map here, those are the areas that you're allowed to do it. And then specific, anything that went through the 040 special use permit pathway. But other than that, there's not a lot. It's about 50-50 in residential zones throughout the city. So
Okay, but that's mostly on the west side then?
yes.
Any other questions? I have two questions, and one is a bit dense, but I just want to make sure I'm following. So this would basically override the special permission clause where if you get 66% of adjacent property owners, it just basically is banning them outright, correct?
It's banning them outright as a permitted use, but if you want to, you can still go through the special use permit process and allow it there. So for example, if you are in the R16, or we'll just take this, if you're in the R2 PT zone now, once the council passes this, you can't have an ADU by right. But if you go through the special use permit process, you can.
Okay, so it's making it more like the rest of the east side and less like the
Yes.
west side.
Yes.
Do we know, I saw on the staff report, it said the vast majority of the properties already in these areas would not work for ADUs either way because they're townhomes or apartments or whatever. Do we know roughly how many units could be eligible for ADUs, meaning they would meet the other requirements, but they just are no longer going to be a permitted use?
I don't have those numbers, no.
Okay. You have a ballpark?
No.
No. Okay. All right. No worries. Thank you so much.
Yep.
I have another question. Sort of, I guess this is more like a general question. Why is there such an imbalance, I guess, between what's like ADUs on the east side versus the west side? Like, what is the reasoning for that?
That was also a council decision that they made. So in 2022, the council was looking at ADU policy and they wanted to both expand ADUs, but not expand it throughout all residential units. So at that point, 33% of the residential zones in the city allowed ADUs. They wanted to increase that, but not go citywide. And so there was a lot of different options explored, and they decided to go with residential zones on the west side.
Okay, so that was their decision to not have the east side allow that. Okay.
Correct.
All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate all the information. So we are now going to open the hearing to public comments. When your time is up, you will hear a ding and the microphone will be muted. Each person may make one comment. If the commission has questions, we will invite you to come up back to the microphone at that time. This time is for comments only. If you have questions about an item, please speak with the staff privately. If there are any neighborhood district chairs present, we would like to invite you first to speak, and you'll have 3 minutes. All right, seeing as I'm not seeing any district chairs, neighborhood district chairs stepping up, we will now open it to the general public. You have 2 minutes to make each comment. This is not the item people are here for. All right, seeing as there are no further comments, we will close public comments. The commission will now discuss amongst ourselves. So how are we feeling, commissioners?
I think this is a great cleanup. I love the 9 areas that are delineated on page 2 of the staff report. If you sort of visualize them on a map, they're very widely distributed throughout the city. So it's not like we're saying in this portion of the city can't do something and this portion can. I think it's important to note that even with these changes, that the city exceeds the state's requirements. So we're not cheating at anything here. On one hand, it doesn't further the general plan goals of housing, but on another hand, it does. So I think it protects neighborhoods by making sure we're not putting ADUs where they shouldn't go. And it also protects neighborhoods by allowing diversity in other ones. I think it's confusing because there's a map here, but the map is just basically what's already there. And it's not what we're amending tonight. The map just shows the R1 zones that already are allowed. And if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Ardmore, every R1 zone in the city can do it through the petition, the getting signatures process. These are just the ones that can do it without the signatures, right? So we're not saying these are the only parts of the city that can do this. And the map is completely unrelated to the R2 PD thing that they're omitting from it. So if that was confusing, I just want to make sure we all understand that. So I don't actually have a problem with it. I think it's an important cleanup and a good safety check, so.
Yes, Commissioner Hill.
I also think it's a good cleanup. It sounds like that was always the intent and we needed to just make things consistent so they're not seeing 2 different things. If I can make a recommendation, I actually think the map is confusing and misleading because it cuts off the west side of the city, and especially since Broadview Shores is now not permitted, et cetera, we need to expand that map to show the whole city and more frankly, honestly show that we've made an imbalance, that the west side has a lot more things like that. It's almost like it's, I don't want to be conspiracy theorist, but that fact's being hidden in this map. We should have a map of the whole city with the zones that allow it.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with this particular thing, but I think that there is a lot of that imbalance and there's a lot of problems with that, obviously. But I think one of the big ones is only making the density go that way is like, I just don't think it's, I don't know. I don't think it's balanced. And I think knowing services are on this side of the freeway.
And public transportation and things like that.
Yeah, I think it's kind of going against the general plan in terms of like increasing walkability, clean air, reducing traffic, all of that. I think it needs to be a lot more balanced across the city, but that's not what's up before us right now. So I agree. It's a good cleanup. It's clearer, but.
Would you like me to make a motion?
I guess
You have
it's,
some more comments.
yeah, I'll just add a couple comments. I think I agree with a lot of what Commissioner DeSoto is saying. Is just, I think in general, it's an odd arrangement, but I guess it's the political thing we came to. ADUs help young families being able to afford mortgages in a city where our average mortgage is over $500,000. And it also can provide alternative housing arrangements for all sorts of people. So I think it's a bummer that we're sort of maybe making less areas of the city intended for that purpose, but there still is the workaround where people can go talk to their neighbors and get it approved. So I guess I'll support the cleanup.
I think it's important for us to understand that there's also safeguards in place with the petition process, that you have to have the parking, you have to have every year you have to, am I remembering that right? You have to renew your application. And so when done correctly, it will be done well. And so if somebody lives in a place that they actually can't provide those, just because they get signatures doesn't mean they're actually going to be able to have an accessory dwelling unit.
That's actually not the problem I have. What I think is the problem is more like allowing it by the opposite of that. Allowing it by right in a certain area. And then in other words, there's like a protectionism that I think is not equally applied toward all the neighborhoods. So either have that work in a way that is, I think that should be consistent as well.
Mhm.
I think, yes, I think they should all have a good process. I just think they should be more balanced, allowed in a more balanced way
I agree.
across the city.
If I remember correctly, when it was passed originally, I think the logic or the reasoning that was used for starting with the west side was because they were trying to meet the goals of affordable housing and family-centric housing and home ownership. And because you have to live in it has to be owner occupied. So somebody who's an out-of-state landlord can't have an ADU because they're not the owner. And I think maybe that was the logic that led to, we want these things in the west side. We want owner occupancy. We don't want it to become a rental haven. And so
Yeah.
it's sort of, in maybe a backwards way, that's where it came from.
Yeah,
think.
I definitely, I think there should not be any ones that are not owner occupied anywhere, in my opinion, like I feel.
Well, that's true, no matter where it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just mean, no, like, I think that should, there should still be high standards, owner occupancy, all the checks, but that should be allowed more broadly or encouraged more broadly.
Thank you. Would anyone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we forward a positive recommendation to the municipal council for item number 1. Provo City Council proposes ordinance text amendments to section 14.30.020, permitted use of accessory dwelling units, to remove specific zones from ADU allowance, citywide application.
I'll second that.
All right, the motion has a second. Thank you. I'll call for a vote then.
Can we discuss the motion?
Sure, yeah,
Oh.
absolutely.
Is there a way we can formally recommend that that map be expanded to include the entire city as part of that motion?
We would need to amend the motion if we wanted to do that. Open to that discussion. If you think that's important.
Well, since we're making a recommendation anyway, I think it would be very easy to say that we forward a positive recommendation with the additional recommendation that they consider updating the map to not be an exclusive map, but to show everything
Citywide.
that's
Citywide.
outright.
Minus maybe Nuns Park area or something.
True.
Yeah, I think that's, we could add that to the motion. Is that okay? So just to clarify, we're adding an emotion to, along with the forward recommendation to also include a broader map that takes into account the whole city, the west side and the east side.
Do we need to like make a new motion and resecond it? Okay.
Okay, so with that, I will call for a vote.
Aye.
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 And I'll vote aye on that. All right, we'll now move to item number 2 on our agenda. Provo City Development Services requests ordinance text amendments to chapter 15.20.120 Parkways, Citywide Application. And I'd like to invite Hannah Salzl up to present.
Hopefully, this follows very much in the footsteps of the earlier artificial turf amendment. We're just applying similar logic to park strips, which were omitted from the first application amendment brought to you. After your vote on this proposed amendment, if you forward a positive recommendation, this amendment for park strips and the previous one you made to the council with the front yards will be combined into one amendment and made to the code at the same time as just part of a general artificial turf cleanup. Our code currently divides park strips into categories based on whether they're narrower than 4 feet or wider, or 4 feet or wider. In this case, park strips narrower than 4 feet, staff is recommending permitting artificial turf without restriction. We already permit poured concrete, permeable pavers, similar non-vegetative ground cover to cover 100% of the strip. Artificial turf seems like it would meet the same standards. If it's wider than 4 feet, then artificial turf would be permitted with the same requirements as in front yards, up to 60%, and must comply with the same installation requirements. Because city staff has already determined that park strips equal to or wider than 4 feet are an ideal environment for trees, this supports that while being consistent with other logic as it's been applied throughout the code. With the noted addition that outdoor carpeting is prohibited in both, which is language that was added to the front yard cleanup, is now being added here. Any questions?
Yes, Commissioner Jensen.
So just to restate, the city council has not approved the one that we previously sent on because you're adding this to it before it goes to them?
Correct. It's on
Okay.
pause.
And then, the second thing, I just had some language suggestions
Mhm.
on the last page, A and B. So it seemed redundant to me to say outdoor carpeting shall not be used in landscaping in both paragraphs. Is that something you could maybe put like bullet point C and just, so it covers both of them or something?
It could be, but from a staff perspective, as we are
Put it
skimming and
there.
honing in on the code, we tend to look at that most relevant paragraph.
Okay. I was also confused about whether it was a shall or a may at A, parkways less than 4 feet in width. Shall be landscaped? Should that be may be landscaped because they don't have to do those things, or are you saying that they have to?
We
One
do
of those
require
things.
them to be landscaped in some way, so it's not just rocks and weeds and left.
Okay, so the shall is good for that.
Yes.
And then the other one was at the beginning of the last blue section and B, artificial turf shall not exceed 60% of the unbuilt surface area. I felt like that the way it read before, it should be.
further east in the canyon areas and the further east parts of the city. That's why this wasn't included in that map. But we realized when the staff wrote the code that disallowed anyone from impacting a 30% slope, we knew at that time that there had to be some out on that applying that rule to every property very strictly and without the chance for variance would probably end up being problematic. So there had to be some form, some way for someone to seek relief from that code provision that you cannot ever impact a 30% slope. The city engineering department itself impacts 30% slopes when they build roads, and they create steeper slopes than that when they build roads.
I have a question for you. You mentioned the bond being sort of a requirement of approval, but it wasn't mentioned in the staff report, at least not explicitly.
The CRC comments,
That's what
listed
that
in the
means.
CRC
Oh, it's in the
comments.
CRC comments. Got it.
Yes.
Okay. That's what I'm failed to connect.
That's why it wasn't repeated.
Got it. Thank you for clarifying that.
And that bond is not only for making sure the hillside is handled correctly, but that bond is for all of the subdivision improvements, that the road gets
Right.
built, that the curbing got to get put in, all those kinds of
So
things.
this concern of you take the dirt, you go sell the dirt, and then you leave it,
Walk
that's
away.
part of the bond in the CRC comments.
Right.
Correct. Got it. Are there any other questions for any of the public commenters or the applicant? I have a small question for you, if you wouldn't mind just coming real fast. I just want to understand something a little bit better. If you could explain it to me. I'm learning through this experience that I don't have the best like geospatial imagination. So I know someone who lives in Garden Villa, and I do know that they're actually in this building right here that's on the top of the map. And it's very close to that hill. And so just help me visualize kind of how that hill will change, the one on the north right above Garden Villa.
Garden Villa.
Yep.
If you see the contour lines, the engineer has already told me that he's preserved the retaining walls and other things that are there. The grade slopes from North Canyon, it slopes up at a grade following that's why you see the contour lines. It slopes from North Canyon up to the hill. To take into account, that's why you see something different on the contour lines to the north than you do to the south, because of the south, we're dealing with ground that is way below even our base grade. And so this has been designed based on existing properties on both sides and also on the back.
So that slope will not change very much, or it'll kind of go down gradually back
It's
towards Canyon.
Based on the way it's drawn out, it actually is flat, then it slopes a little down
Yep.
to the retaining wall that's there.
Got it.
And I don't know that it makes any difference, but they're not paying anything for the dirt. It's an opportunity to get rid of it so we can develop something. I don't get a red sand out of the dirt. But not
I
that
hear
that
you. I hear
matters,
you. The property's
but
worth probably a lot more than the dirt, but I hear you.
that is-
Thank
but
you.
Nevertheless, it's interesting. Thank you.
Good clarification. I'm sorry, I've closed public comment. I apologize. We got to stick to the protocol of the meeting. All right, we're going to now open up for discussion among the commission.
I just wanted to answer one question that was asked that didn't get addressed about, are these lots big enough for Provo? And the answer is yes. We go as small as 6,000 square feet on some single lots. And so just to clarify that.
Thank you.
I would love to see that. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, Garden.
Thank you. So how are we feeling, commission? Any thoughts, reactions? We're all trying to imagine 3D geospace in our
Yeah, we
brain.
just need a minute, I think.
Yes. It's flat. I don't know what you guys are worried about. There's no hill here. Speaking of being geospatially deficient. I thought it was interesting, commissioners, that of all the comments we heard, one person actually thought it wasn't dense enough. That they wanted it. That I think that's worth just thinking about. Another person said, or I think maybe that same person said it was separate from the neighborhood. which I actually kind of like, because anyone who has concern about traffic going through, I don't see that as a disadvantage. I see that as an advantage. I also think getting rid of a hillside road and having a nice flat one is a huge plus. I built my house in an area that had untouched hillside behind it. And for the first 3 years we lived there, we had constant excavation and compaction of soils and dust and noise and walls vibrating. And it's annoying, but it's also not against the law. So when you have vacant land, it's the nature of the beast. So I wish that I could say that's horrible, we can't do that, but 90 days is better than 3 years. So I don't know. I just want you to know we're hearing those concerns, but I don't know how we can say you can't build a project because it's going to make dust, because that happens everywhere. I know this is a special exception and it will be excessive, but I'm just saying that out loud. I feel really comfortable with the guarantees that the city departments are writing into this to ensure that we don't just approve a gravel pit, but that we approve something that will become something. I don't think it addresses affordable housing in the city at all, but it does address housing. So that's still a thing. I love that it gives good access to utilities and that it's taking traffic onto a road that was intended to carry traffic.
Lisa, what zone was this in?
R18.
R18.
1-8.
Which is kind of funny because the area to the north is it R18 for the Garden Villa?
Shouldn't it be?
So it's kind of a weird, I think it's R18 because the hillside's R18 and it's going to the west.
The Garden Villa is the R2PD zone.
And then the Stadium Terrace apartments below it.
Campus mixed use.
Okay. So, you know, they may be right that somebody doesn't want a single family neighborhood there. But if the developer is willing, I don't know. How do you guys feel about that?
I feel like either one is good.
Okay.
I definitely think this would be a really good place for more dense housing because it's right by BYU, and I actually lived in the Edgewood condos and would walk and bike even farther away, and so but if that's not acceptable, I mean, I think we need all kinds of housing. Like I'm sorry, I keep forgetting your name, Jonathan.
Jonathan, yeah.
But I mean your last name.
Hill.
Commissioner Hill said that,
We're going to get rid of the
Yes.
hill probably though.
Hey.
This isn't about you.
like he said earlier, there are large families too. You know, it's not just young, small families. There are a lot of those, but there are also larger families who might, you know, want this. So I think either is good, to be honest. Any addition, like we were saying, no one thing is going to do everything, but all those little tiny things all over will help.
Do you have any thoughts, Commissioner Knudsen?
I feel better about it. Originally, when it looked like they were going to remove the whole east side and move it to the west side, wasn't too thrilled about it. But I think if they go about it right, and if they go through the procedures, which they've outlined, which Mr. Pepperoni just said about the different steps that they will have to go through, I think it can be a good addition to the neighborhood.
Yeah, I think several of the comments as well as the letters we received, they weren't necessarily opposed to adding, you know, additional houses in the neighborhood that are probably going to be nice, large new homes. It was mostly concerns about dealing with this hill property, revegetation, ensuring that happens, bonding. And I think that's what we're considering before us, is essentially allowing them to kind of have a conditional override of the 30%, but with very strict requirements around these things that are very important to you. So.
Couple comments. I appreciate that they're not doing the max slope that the geotechnical report said. I like when we're not pushing the limits that way. From what David Day and others are saying, this is a conservative slope. Yeah, the biggest risk I see is they find a spring or something like that underneath, and that might cause issues. But it sounds like there are protections in place to mitigate those if they occur. So I'm confident we're not going to have a Draper situation in this place because the city is very vigilant on this and seems to be very involved. I do agree as well. A mixture of housing types is very important. I was surprised they didn't try for more density in this place, but I'm happy to take what's presented to me, right? And just look at it for its merits and what is there. And then finally, I see in the staff report, it specifically says there are additional conditions that staff would recommend as required before permits are issued. Do we need to do anything to make those requirements? Or are they already required and going to happen in those cases?
I don't believe there's anything else you need to elaborate on or enumerate.
Okay, thank you.
I thought it was interesting to note that it appears that there are less linear feet of hillside when this excavation is done because it doesn't go around the entire edge, it just cuts it in half.
That's true.
So there's actually less hill to retain at a similar slope.
Good spatial reasoning. Good job.
I'm learning.
Just FYI.
Not all of us can be hill specialists.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes, Commissioner, or sorry, Mr. Pepperoni.
Just FYI for the commission members, I was just doing market research on the west side of Provo because of some projects that are coming online or will be coming online out there. The market value for an 8,000 square foot lot on the west side of Provo, a fully improved 8,000 square foot lot, is $180,000 today.
Just for the lot.
Just for the lot.
And that's on the west side.
That's on the west side. So the rule of thumb in real estate is if the lot is 180, the home is going to be around or at least 720.
So is that supposed to encourage us or discourage us from the decision we have before us?
I think it's encouraging in terms of the quality of home that would be built, but it certainly is discouraging in terms of affordability, housing affordability.
But if that's the case, we should just only build townhomes because nobody can afford them either.
Every community needs its millionaires. No, I'm just kidding. So I think, yeah, that's interesting. One comment that was made that I thought was an interesting comment was about how these will probably end up being student rentals, but maybe not at that price point.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty
Not
high.
legal ones anyway, not
Yeah,
with
you'd
three
have to-
batching
you'd
singles
have-
in them.
Yeah, I don't think they would be legal.
On that note, I mean, we talk about this, but when you create high-end lots, those people do move out of other houses, right? And they move out of mid-range houses, which means someone can move into the mid-range house. And so there is kind of a trickle-down effect. Not saying we should only build big houses either, but it's not hurting the lower-end stock in this case.
I have a question for staff. We talked a lot about the precautions that we're trying to put in place with anything that's done to ensure that we don't just excavate and nothing happens. What if they receive approval to cut into the slope and then they revisit the idea of having higher density there, getting a zone change, whatever? Like, how do the precautions that you've recommended play into, because sometimes that happens, the business model changes. So are we saying this has to be houses once the bulldozer starts digging away, or is there any wiggle room for something different to be proposed?
I don't believe there's wiggle room because of requiring the plat to be recorded and requiring bonding that goes with this plat. I don't think there would be wiggle room. That's the point of doing this, taking those steps.
So when you bond at the plat recording, does that mean they lose a whole ton of money if they renege on the subdivision
Because the
plans?
city then has the money to go build it if they won't.
Okay, okay, so it's a significant bond,
Yes.
not just you broke the sidewalk, you have to replace it
No,
bond.
the
but-
bond is sufficient for the city to go in and build this entire thing as you're looking at it.
Okay. Okay, so.
In fact,
um,
it's 10 or 20% above that.
So if
because-
they have any thoughts of changing, they would have to go back, they would have to do that before they dig any dirt from the hill, essentially,
Yes.
with these. Okay, thank you.
How are we feeling, commissioners? Do we want to do a motion or any more discussion?
I've learned over my years on the planning commission that the staff has done a lot of research and that developers aren't going to put money into something that they don't believe the market can support. And I'm usually a naysayer about setting precedents, but I'm feeling good about this, that this is kind of a risky zoning proposition, like to put single family in a place where normally it doesn't seem logical. And if the developer feels like that's worth doing, I'm all for having good quality housing right there. So I'd be inclined to say I would approve it.
I wondered about that because there's right near my house, there's a little, almost just like this. I think there's maybe 5 or 6 homes, large homes. And they've been pretty much done for a while and I haven't seen, there's still for sale signs on all but one. So I don't know how encouraging or discouraging. I'm not an economist or anything, but I mean, yeah, I look at that and I doubt a little bit, like you said, Lisa, but I'm fine with this if there's no alternative. I mean, I would be fine, like I said, either way with more dense or not.
Would anyone like to make a motion?
I'd like to just say one more thing. We're really making a decision on whether we're okay with a 30% slope being cut into for a housing development. And we like this plan and the city will take it from there. But our decision tonight is we're okay with the slope cutting,
Yeah, in this context.
right? We're not approving a subdivision as laid out here. We're just saying those are the parameters that it would be approved for, but if they don't want it, they can still come back. We're just saying you should
Sure.
cut the slope. Is that what everyone understands?
Yeah, that's right.
I'm okay with that. I feel like the engineering department, the permitting, all that goes into that, I feel like there's great oversight in place to protect people above and below.
Yeah, referring back to the letters and the comments, I feel like this includes all of those in, as Mr. Caproni said in the CRC comments or whatever. So I think they hit all the marks on those.
I'm actually kind of excited to see how an idea like this could play out too. I think it could be really nice.
Just on a personal judgment note, as we're kind of being asked to make a judgment on this, I do say that given the developer's experience, that I watched the video about the temple, that's an immensely complicated effort. And so it does give me a little bit of confidence that this can be done in a highly professional way, especially if the city concurs.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
I can make a motion. I move that we approve item 4, Tyson Reynolds requests preliminary subdivision approval for a new 8-lot single-family subdivision, including grading slopes of over 30% in the R1.8 one-family residential zone located at 2000 North Canyon Road, Pleasant View neighborhood.
I'll second that.
Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing as there's no discussion on the motion, I'll call for a vote.
Hold on. Discussion.
Okay, we do have discussion.
That this approval is based on the conditions outlined being met.
Yeah.
And the conditions are that they address all the CRC comments, obtain a geotechnical report, which I think they've already done, record the final plat, supply required bonding, and revegetate the area as required. So that would be adding those conditions to the motion. You okay with that?
Yeah, I think that's what I asked Bill about, and he said we didn't need to enumerate them. But
Okay, thank you. I
I'm
understand
happy to
now.
enumerate them.
I understand
It
now.
can make us all feel, sleep well tonight. So
Yes.
we've enumerated them. All right, I'll call for a vote then. Commissioner Hill.
Aye.
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 And I will also vote aye. That's passes unanimously. That was our last item of the evening. Would anyone like to make a motion to adjourn?
I'll move to adjourn.
A second?
I'll second it.
All those in favor say aye.
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 All right, the commission meeting is adjourned. Thank you everyone for attending and for your comments.